Hello, everyone. I'm Chelsea, and we'll be talking about some aspects of the Arizona Constitution today. When looking at the basic definitions of initiative and referendum without the relation to the Arizona Constitution, they fit perfectly with the Constitution and how it works. Initiative is the ability to assess and initiate things independently. With relation to the Constitution, this means that voters in Arizona can propose new laws or make amendments to the Constitution through a process called the initiative process. Now that we looked at the initiative, next we will look at a referendum. This means there is a general vote by the electorate on a single political question that has been referred to them for a direct decision. When thinking about this definition and looking at the Arizona Constitution, we can see a direct relation to this definition as well. As a part of the Constitution, voters can use a referendum to veto a law or parts of a law by collecting signatures from other voters to place the issue on the ballot. Now that we know what these terms mean and how they are an important part of the Constitution, it's time to learn how they are created. First, we will look at creating an initiative. When preparing an initiative, there are 7 steps that someone must take before any voting happens. The very first thing that someone must do is file an application for a serial number through the Secretary of State's office. After gaining a serial number, it is important to gather the correct petition from the Secretary of State's office. The next step, an important step, is to ensure that any paid or out-of-state circulators have registered with the Secretary of State's office, followed by gaining signatures from eligible voters. Once all the necessary signatures are gathered, the petition will be submitted to the Secretary of State's office, ensuring this is done by any deadlines. Finally, the Secretary of State and any county recorders will process the petition and determine if enough signatures were gathered to place the petition on the ballot. When looking at the signatures, the Arizona Constitution requires signatures from 15% of voters to place a constitutional amendment on the ballot. There is also a requirement for 10% of signatures to place a statutory amendment on the ballot. Next, we'll look at a referendum. A referendum works similarly to an initiative in the aspect that there are also steps that need to be taken when creating a referendum. Whoever is looking to create a referendum must submit an application for a serial number. Once the application is submitted, they then gather the correct referendum petition from the Secretary of State's office. The person in charge of the petition must also ensure that any paid or out-of-state circulators are registered with the Secretary of State's office. After doing these things, next comes the collection of signatures from voters and submitting the petition to the Secretary of State's office by any deadlines. The Secretary of State and any county recorders will process the petition and place them on the ballot as long as they meet the signature requirements. The required signatures needed to be placed on the ballot is equal to 5% of the number of votes casted in the last gubernatorial election. After looking at an initiative and a referendum separately, it's time to see how they are like with one another. With both an initiative and a referendum, everything is brought and submitted through the Secretary of State's office. They also both have to first submit an application for a serial number before they can start to collect signatures. With both an initiative and a referendum, the person responsible for these petitions need to ensure they are gathering the correct petition and ensure that any paid or out-of-state circulators are registered with the Secretary of State's office. Once their signatures are gathered, then they both bring everything to the Secretary of State's office, where the Secretary of State and any county recorders will process the petition and determine if enough signatures were gathered to place the petition on the ballot. Although it seems like there are a lot of things in common with an initiative and a referendum, there are also differences between them as well. The first difference between an initiative and a referendum referendum is the required signatures for each. With an initiative, there needs to be a signature from 15% voters to place a constitutional amendment on the ballot. There's also a requirement for 10% of signatures to place a statutory amendment on the ballot, whereas the required signatures for a referendum has to be equal to 5% of the number of votes casted in the last gubernatorial election. Along with the differences in signature requirements, their deadlines are also different from one another. With an initiative, the deadline is 4 months prior to the next general election, whereas a referendum's deadline is 90 days after the date of adjournment of the legislative session in which the measure was passed for the year. Now that we have compared and contrasted an initiative and a referendum, it's time to take a look at the pros and cons of each. First, we will look at an initiative. Within an initiative, voters are able to propose new laws or amendments, whereas a referendum allows voters to veto laws or parts of a law. Both of these give voters the ability to feel heard and make some changes to their government. Another pro for them is the checks and balances aspect. They are both able to check the legislature by making these petitions to either stop a law from being passed or by making changes to laws to best suit the needs of the Arizona citizens and not just in favor of the government. A final pro that I believe is pretty interesting is that an initiative and a referendum, Arizona citizens can propose initiative policies that may not otherwise be considered. Although there are quite a few pros, there are also some cons that come with an initiative and a referendum. One major con that citizens may not know or fully understand when placing these petitions is that some laws or issues can be a lot more difficult to fully understand without the prior knowledge of the topic to fully understand the full details of the issue. Another con or issue that can come with these types of petitions is that people with a lot of money or power can use that money or power to change others' minds to become on their side by gaining signatures the petition needs. A final con that I also feel is important is voters and citizens signing these petitions may not be fully aware of any consequences that may arise when putting forth their petition. Some individuals may only be focused on the now and not what can happen in the future. With everything that we have learned about the initiatives and referendum in relation to the Arizona Constitution, it's time to look at how they support the idea of a direct democracy. When dealing with direct democracy, the citizens directly decide on policies, laws, and other public matters rather than elected officials making these decisions. Both an initiative and a referendum support direct democracy by allowing Arizona citizens to make petitions to veto laws, change laws, make amendments, and propose new and initiative policies. By allowing citizens to make petitions of these things, they're able to use their voices to be heard and make changes for themselves and other citizens in Arizona. Overall, having an initiative and a referendum with a direct democracy is more beneficial as citizens potentially know more about their needs as opposed to elected officials who may not fully understand what the citizens of Arizona truly need.